How's everyone doing today?
Good.
I am here. This is not good. I
often say that.
dropping cables all over the place. I took a train up yesterday from Oregon, where I'm working on a congressional campaign. So I'm a little bit tired because it's a campaign. I'm working 18 hours a day and no sleep.
So much fun.
It is so much fun.
I bet.
So are you going to win?
No.
What's your campaign?
Oh, okay, I shouldn't ask that. Sorry.
We might. I mean, there's a chance. We started 25 points down.
Wow.
So,
Fine.
there's no problem at all.
Is it how gerrymandered is it? Is it a badly gerrymandered district?
Only we're in the population list. They gave us lots of country. No, it's pretty good actually. But so there's a ballot initiative in Oregon on legalization going on right now, and so I've been watching them operate and been enjoying watching that and hoping that they are successful. I'm wishing that it had been successful the last time for reasons I just won't get into. So we're going to get started. I'm hoping more people will join us. We're running the session again this afternoon. I'm going to apologize in advance because I've been asked to condense 16 hours of the training material into 2 1.5-hour sessions. So I don't know how successful I was at carving out materials. Right now I placed this presentation at closer to 3 hours than 1.5 hours. Okay. So I'm going to go quickly. Please feel free to ask questions. If you don't understand something I'm saying, put up your hand. I will do my best to answer it. But in terms of long, drawn-out discussions about policy, this isn't the session for that. And it will just basically mean that we don't get as much learning. So, my name is Brian Rice. Among other things, I am the past president of the Liberal Party of Canada in British Columbia. I ran, some of you may know, for president of the Liberal Party of Canada last year. I am not the president of the Liberal Party of Canada, so maybe you don't want to take campaign management advice from me. But I'm also president of Four Crows Consulting Limited, which is a political consulting company. Organized to Win, the website's there. That's kind of my new thing. If you go there, you will find that there's nothing there. And that is because as I was beginning to write Organized to Win and get the website up, I got this contract in Oregon. So people paying me for things is more important to me than writing content that nobody's going to see. So I wandered off to Oregon. I guarantee you in November sometime when I get back, this will be up. And Anita's going to provide me with everybody's information who was here, and you'll get a free subscription to it. It's basically going to be campaign best practices, discussions with people who do campaigning and get out the vote and those kind of things on a regular basis, articles from those kind of people so that you have an ongoing resource in your efforts to campaign on this issue. And let's talk about that for a second, actually. I am not here to talk about marijuana legalization. I'm here because I support marijuana legalization. But there's something that we need to get clear right up front, and that is winning an election campaign or getting your point across an election campaign has almost nothing to do with the issue that you are supporting. It has everything to do with the number of voters you talk to. It has everything to do with how you organize your campaign in order to be successful. Simply going out and saying we support marijuana legalization and waving a flag on the side of the road is not going to win you anything. Going out and talking to voters where they live and doing that in an intentional way and understanding how voters actually cast their ballots, that's what's important. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. And this applies whether you are running a campaign for a candidate, this applies whether or not you are doing a ballot measure in the US, or this applies whether or not you're being a third-party single-issue influencer on an election campaign, which is what we're all here for. All right? This is how you organize campaigns in order to win. And I didn't get my agenda slide filled in. But today we're going to be talking about a model for how you structure your team, and then we're going to talk about an overview of the process model that I'm going to be recommending you use. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about nothing. Tomorrow we're going to dig down into that process model, and I'm going to give you some ideas around risk management, issue management, how you track voters, how the nuts and bolts of actually running a campaign. So if you want to be a campaign manager or a voter contact manager, tomorrow's session is for you. And as was already announced, instead of doing that in 2 1.5-hour sessions, thankfully they let me combine it into 1 3-hour sessions separated. So I only have to fit 8 hours worth of material into 3 hours instead of 1.5. So let's talk about some of the reasons why political organizations fail and why campaigns fail. The first is separation of goal and activity. Now, I've delivered a version of this presentation for the Liberal Party of Canada all across the country. I've talked to a lot of different campaign organizations. And the second time I gave it was in Victoria. And in Victoria, I got to this part and somebody put up their hand, it was the president of one of the Liberal Associations of Presidents. We're really good at activities here. I'm like, oh, great. We hold like 12 events a month. I'm like, well, that's really impressive. Sorry, I got a hair removed. He said, but nobody comes to them. That is less impressive. And I said, well, do you make any phone calls to people to invite them? No. Do you send emails to anybody who isn't a member of the party to invite them? No. Do you put flyers on telephone poles? No. Are you surprised nobody comes to your events? No. Right? They lost sight of the fact that the reason they were holding events was to do voter contact. It was to engage with people. And instead, the purpose became holding the event itself. Look at us, aren't we great? We're holding an event. Yay! And they were checking off, event, 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 aren't we great? Event, event, event. And never once talking to a new voter.
They must be project management professionals.
Well, no, because project management professionals know this. Right? You never lose sight of your underlying goal. And our underlying goal here is to connect with voters. It's always to connect with voters. So any event that you're doing, any activity you're doing, anything you're doing at all, always has to take sight of the root goal, connecting with voters. And when you lose sight of that, when you start focusing on activities instead of your goal, you'll start to fail. And what happens is, right, the person who came to the 12th event that month and saw the exact same people there, they gave up. They threw up their hands. Why am I volunteering here? I'm not doing any good. And they wandered away. So your volunteers want to see that you actually have a purpose and that you're connecting with that purpose. So always make sure that the number one thing you're focused on is connecting with voters. Separation of organizational units, and this happens in all organizations. In corporations, this is where you have the marketing silo, which is different than the product development silo, which is different than the business management silo, and they never ever talk. And you see out there the salespeople selling a product you don't build.
Yeah.
And they come back to develop, I used to work in software, they come back and say, well, you can build that, right? No. We can't build a magic go-to-the-moon device from software. In political parties, you'll see this. You'll have the national wing of the party, the provincial wing of the party, the local wing of the party. And, communication is challenged between those wings. They're siloed. So the national party will start running a message on TV or whatever. And nobody bothered to tell the local people who were still talking about last month's message. So, yes.
Can you tell us right away? The Liberal Party of Canada is the problem?
It's a problem in every organization. Because as you get siloed, somebody working in Ottawa doesn't always think to pick up the phone or send an email with somebody working on the ground. It's a problem that you're always struggling to overcome. And it's something that's more or less successful depending on who's involved in what you're doing. But yeah, I mean, it is a challenge in any organization. It's what it comes down to is how willing is that organization to try to overcome those challenges. In this organization, what I suspect you're going to have is you're going to have the central organization of Sensible BC, which is headquartered down the street here, and then you're going to have all of you out in various parts of the province working. And it's going to be very easy to get siloed. It's going to be very easy to have a disconnect in that communication. And if you allow that to happen, then you will suffer. Your efforts to legalize will suffer because of that. So you've got to always be fighting to make sure the communication is in place, that you're talking to each other. And it's not just, your local organization in the central one, it's your local organization and the one in the next town over. Are you communicating? Are you having those talks? And then within the team itself, right, you're going to have somebody who's working on voter contact, somebody who's working on communications, maybe somebody who's doing some fundraising. If you're not communicating within your own team, you're going to encounter challenges. And then finally, failure to communicate and act as a team. So, yeah.
That's a big one.
Oh, sorry, no, lack of common language. Organizations go. But in a lot of organizations, different groups within the organization have different words for the same thing. So, yes.
And the same word for different things, that's when you're really getting hit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will give you an example once again from my political background. When I first got involved in the Liberal Party of Canada, I was chairing a meeting. And our constitution in the party defines, well, what everything means, but in particular, in this particular case, I was talking about what the term president means in terms of a riding association. How many people here are involved in politics? Do you know what a riding association is? And so I was about to start talking to this group of riding presidents about something, and I'm like, well, hold on here. How many people here have read the Constitution? And 3 people put up their hand in the room. All of them lawyers. And the problem with that is that the Constitution defines what the term president means in terms of the Liberal Party of Canada. And since nobody had read that, everybody has their own opinion, their own different opinion of what president meant. Probably because they watched The West Wing too many times. So when I'm sitting there talking about what president means to me, and they were talking about what president meant to them, we thought we were communicating. But we really weren't, because we had 2 different definitions for the same length, for the same word. So we need to make sure that if we're going to be successful as an organization here in BC, we all have to be working from the same playbook. We all have to be having the same definitions, we need to be using the same process. That's not to say that we can't change it up where we have to and be adaptable. But the reality is that if whatever the central organizer is in one area thinks that their job is different from what the central organizer thinks in a different area, you're going to run into challenges. And then finally, failure to communicate and act as a team. I believe Nick is actually going to be talking about volunteers and teams later, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But in the team building industry, where I have done a lot of work, there's a saying that team equals product. All of the vices and virtues that the team has will express themselves in the product that you are delivering. This is mostly for creative and IP-based products, so I can't come from software. So if you have a team that's argumentative, doesn't get along very well, you're likely going to end up with a product, and in software you see this all the time, that is hard to use, that is argumentative, that fights with you. If you have a team that works well together, that is excited to be working together, communicates well, then you'll end up with a product that is exciting to use and that communicates well. So think about that in terms of politics, and when we're out talking to voters, if our team is united, if we're pulling in the same direction, if we're getting along, there's a high degree of communication, we enjoy working together, then the voter is going to experience that when we go to their door and knock on it. If we're argumentative, not getting along, don't like each other very much, the voter is going to experience that when we go to the door. So the number one thing you have to focus on moving forward, and Nick's going to talk about this more, is becoming a coherent, cohesive team. And that's what's going to influence the voters the most. And when they see your passion, when they see your commitment, when they see your commitment to each other and how passionate and capable your team is, they will be attracted to that.
It screams professionalism.
It does. Though most professional companies don't have good teams. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do we overcome those 4 challenges? I forgot to take EDA off the slide. Sorry. This is a set of best practices and principles for running a political organization and a campaign. It represents a framework, not a methodology. I'm not going to get into that much today because we don't have a lot of time. And most importantly, we're focusing on people and process, not comms products or what doors we're knocking on or what the policy is. It's about creating a good team and then giving that team a process that they can use to be successful. So at this point, if this was the full 8-hour version, we'd be all splitting up and doing a 15-minute exercise to demonstrate how bad hierarchical teams suck. I'm going to skip that exercise in the interest of time and just tell you, hierarchical teams suck. This traditional notion that there's one person at the top, and then there's a couple of middle managers, and then there's the workers. If you're lucky to only have a 3-level hierarchy.
Yeah.
It's flawed for a couple of reasons. First, it creates a single point of failure. When there is only one person making a decision on a team, especially when they're making decisions about things they're not experts in, you're putting all of the power in the one person, and people are fallible. They make mistakes. Their egos get in the way. What you want on a team is the people who are qualified to make the decision making the decision. The people who are experts in communications or voter contact or fundraising or whatever should be making the decisions that are relevant to them, not one person sitting at the top. Hierarchical teams suffer from a high degree of miscommunication. The person in the top tells the person in the middle something, the person in the middle was half asleep and not really paying attention. The salesperson, worker, something completely different. Person A says we need to go out and knock on doors. Person Z says, okay, we're invading Nicaragua. This gets better if you laugh at my jokes. I'm just saying. The other problem with hierarchical teams is very often the person at the top thinks that their vision of what's going to happen is so clearly self-evident that of course everybody knows it, and they forget to communicate it. So the people who are out there working, the volunteers, the people who are actually knocking on doors, don't actually understand where they fit into the big picture. They're knocking on a door, but they don't know why, because the person at the top has never communicated it. If you've done any political door knocking, you'll have the experience of walking to a campaign office. It's like, here's a campaign sheet, get out of here. No training, no help, no understanding of why you're knocking on doors. Just go, get out of here. And then when you come back, it's like, that sucked. And you're like, yeah, go away. I may have knocked on a few hospital doors in my time. Actually, in the 2011 election, I probably shouldn't be taking time for stories, but in the 2011 election, I had a canvasser. He was a very sweet guy. He was about 70. And he walks up to a door. This is in Maple Ridge. Knocks on the door. Door opens. Shotgun. Now, working on an American campaign, I'm getting used to that. But on a Canadian campaign, this is a little odd. What the voter didn't know is that kind, sweet, gentle old man was ex-RCMP. And a few of his friends showed up with the nice flashing lights, and the voter had a bad day. But it's important for everybody on the team to know why they're involved, what their contribution means to the whole, and what their connection to it is. Because they're far more willing to put up with negative campaign experiences, negative door-knocking experiences, if they understand why that's helping you win, why that's helping get your message across, why that's going to result in legalization. And then finally, it's expensive. Hierarchical teams where you have barriers to communication, it's just the process is expensive. It's an especially in small teams, it's an unnecessary burden. So don't do it. We're going to talk about what we can replace it with. In order to understand what we can replace a hierarchical team with, the first thing we have to understand is what are the goals of any political organization. Now there's a goal on here I didn't write down. Anybody tell me what that is?
To win.
To win!
Yes.
Hey. To win, right? We are a political organization here, Sensible BC. That's what we're here to achieve a particular outcome, and that's legalization, or decrim, or whatever you want to call it. And it's really nice to talk about political philosophy. I'm a geek. I'm a political geek. I sit around and talk about different forms of government and how to reform the Senate and all of those things ad nauseum when I get together with my friends and mix beer in with the equation. Because I'm a political geek. Do you know what most voters aren't?
Political geeks.
Political geeks. Yeah. Right? We're here to win, ultimately. And we start taking our eye off that goal, is when bad things start happening on campaigns. We're here to win, and that means we need to use the most effective tools at our disposal in order to get out there and have conversations with voters that'll make them and influence them to vote the way we want them to vote. That is not having deep philosophical arguments about legalization with the voter at the door.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that will not win votes. Arguing with them is also a good one. I had a canvasser the other day chase a guy to his car. We were standing at an event. It was a gun show. Also, as a Canadian, something Americans are fun. Sniper rifles on guys just walking in. It's like, wow. Anyways, this volunteer chases this voter. She's like, no, sir, you don't understand how important this is. I'm like, going, I'm pretty sure he doesn't care. And I'm pretty sure at this point, even if he thought about voting for us, he's not anymore. Right? Arguments aren't going to get you anywhere. So, number one goal is to win. We have to keep sight of that. It's always, it's to accomplish our purpose. But in order to accomplish our purpose, there are 7 other goals that we need to cover off. The first is we need to have an effective organization. And it's not good enough for you as a local organizer to say, well, that's up to Sensible BC there in Vancouver to worry about. In order to be successful, you need to ensure that the organization is successful overall.
Yeah.
Again, going back to the political world, 2011 clearly demonstrated for the Liberal Party of Canada that even a well-run, highly effective local campaign can be sabotaged from the center.
Thank you.
That was a suboptimal electoral result for us. So you need to have an effective organization around you. Second, you need to operate within constraints. Financial, schedule, constitutional, I don't know since the BC has a constitution, but legal, right? You don't want to be out there breaking the law. Somebody needs to make sure that all of the technical details, that you're on time, on budget, not spending more money than you have, you're following the law, right? We've seen over the last couple of years a number of politicians get in trouble because they didn't understand the CRT regulations around robocalls. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about the fraud, I'm just talking about the real, just legitimate. If you don't say your name and address in the robocall, you're going to get fined. So somebody's got to know that. If you're making robocalls, you need to know what the rules are. If you're knocking on doors, you need to know when start times and end times are, otherwise you will get fined. And because you're a third-party influencer on an election, you will have to follow the Elections Act and the rules therein. So somebody has to be making sure that you're actually following the rules and that you're accomplishing the tasks you're setting out to do. You also need to have sufficient financial resources. Right? If you're not raising enough money to support your activities, then you're going to suffer. So somebody has to be making sure that you're raising money. I know they're going to be raising a lot of money centrally, but you're also going to have your local operations that you're going to have to worry about. Somebody needs to make sure that your physical and logistical needs are looked after. Right? If you're having an event, somebody's got to book the room, make sure there's tables there, make sure there's registration in place, make sure that it's decorated, make sure there's a projector and a screen. If you're having monthly meetings, who's booking the room? Are you in somebody's living room? Are you at a community center? Who's doing all of that work? Somebody's got to make sure that the physical needs are looked after. You need to convey the values, purpose, and activities of your organization to the voters, to your community. Right? There's no point having a big rally if you haven't told the voters you're having a big rally. No one shows up. So somebody's got to do that work of communicating. You need to recruit, engage, retain volunteers and supporters. Right? You need to bring people into the organization. You need to recruit volunteers, and then you've got to manage those volunteers. And then finally, identify, persuade, and get out the vote. I think that's fundamentally what we're going to be trying to do, right? Is convince voters to vote in a particular way based on our issue. So somebody's got to manage that process. And if you convince a whole bunch of people that our issue is important and to vote that way, and then they stay home on election day, that's a problem. Right? It's a problem actually that this community in particular has faced a number of times. It's not that there's not a wide base of support for legalization. There is. There's a lot of people who are concerned about legalization never get up off their butts and vote.
Right.
And sorry if, I'm selling a truth nobody wants to hear, but that's the truth.
We know. We know.
So your motive, you have to be not just persuading. Get out the vote is going to be an incredibly important part of this initiative. It's about convincing those people that it is worth their time to go cast a ballot, even if this is the only time they cast a ballot in their lives, which I, of course, disagree with. But even if that's the only time they're going to cast a ballot, this is an issue worth casting a ballot for. So a lot of your work won't be actually convincing them that you're right. A lot of your work is going to be convincing them that it's worth their time. So the thing about these goals is there's not one of them that you can ignore without challenging and threatening your overall success. All of these goals are equally important, right? You can have the best decorated room in the world, but if you haven't actually gone out and invited people to the event, that event will be a failure. You can have a whole bunch of money in the bank, but if you have no volunteers to go out and knock on doors, you're not going to win. And if you have a whole bunch of volunteers, but you don't have enough money to print the lit that they need to go to the doors with, then that also will be a challenge. All of these goals, all 7 of these goals are equally important. They need to be equally valued. And so in order to accomplish that, we're going to represent each of these goals with a role. And because each of the goals are equally important, each of the roles must be equally valued. There's no one person who's in charge. There's no one person who's more important than anyone else. Everybody has a job to do. And that creates a team of peers, which is way better than a hierarchical team. Now, in order for a team of peers to be successful, there's a couple of things we need to do a little bit differently than a hierarchical team. The first is we have to have a high degree of trust with our team. We need to believe that the communications chair knows when to send a press release, what to put in the press release, who to send it to, and how to follow up with the reporters they're sending it to. Because there's no person sitting there over their shoulder going, have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? There's nobody giving them instructions. In a team of peers, we're expected to know our jobs and to execute on those jobs. So we have to trust our team. We have to trust that that's happening. What you don't want to have to do is have a meeting every time you want to do something, right? Has anybody been on a committee? Yeah. You know that, all right, I move that I get to send out a press release on this event at this date, and everybody starts, wordsmithing the press release that you spent already 20 hours working on or whatever. And by the time the committee actually decides, okay, yeah, go ahead, send the press release. That was last month. Right? Or I propose we go knock on these doors and you get into a big fight. You have to trust that the people who are doing the jobs know what they're doing. That doesn't mean that you can't have input. It doesn't mean that you can't say, hey, I think I've got a better idea or a way to improve it. But it does mean that you don't need to actually have a vote on every little last thing. Anybody here use Robert's Rules? Does anybody here like Robert's Rules? Yeah, it's the most ineffective way of running a team on the planet. Right? What parliamentary procedure is designed for is when people with different objectives are coming together to common cause. Right? Think House of Commons. Groups of people who have various levels of distaste for each other and their positions, who have to work together. That's what parliamentary procedure is good for. What it's not good for is a group of people who agree on something trying to get something done. It's an unnecessary level of burden. If you're having to resort to Robert's Rules in your meetings, on a committee, every meeting, then your team is broken. Don't worry about the rules, fix the team. One of the great things about a team of peers is that it empowers everyone, because everybody knows their responsibility. I'm on the communications committee, and my responsibility on the communications committee is social media. I now have an identity. I have a purpose. I know what my connection to the overall success of the team is, because I've had a say in what those goals are, what that success criteria is. The more volunteers you have involved in setting and defining what your success criteria is, the better your organization is going to be, because those volunteers are going to have a connection to that purpose. They're going to understand that connection. I'm not going to get to show a video I normally show during the course of it because of time, but if you want, there's a video by a guy named Daniel Pink, and he wrote a book called Drive. And if you look it up online, it's Dan Pink Drive, and it's one of those whiteboard videos. It's about 10 minutes long, and it'll go through what it is that actually motivates people. It turns out the science shows us that people are not motivated by money the way we think that we are or they are. What actually motivates people is connection to a noble purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So people want to feel like they're doing something important. People want to feel like they have the ability to chart their own course. People want to learn a skill and then be celebrated for executing on that skill. Especially when you're running a volunteer organization, you need to understand what the motivating factors are, because you've got to work with people who are contributing a very small amount of their time to you, and you want them to feel like they're connected to a noble purpose, that they have a degree of autonomy in what they're doing. They're not just being told, go canvas, now go away. And finally, that they're expressing mastery, that they're being celebrated for successfully accomplishing a skill. And that's what a team of peers really does. It really brings in all three of those things.
And thank you for saying that point about trust being fundamental. It strikes me that might overcome one of the problems that I experience every day at work. I've worked for TELUS for 29 years. And that is a situation where out of 15 people, every one of them can say no, but nobody can say yes. And I think you help solve that problem.
Yeah, in advanced team management, like really, really advanced, there's something called unanimous decision making, where actually it's a good thing that people can say no and not yes.
Yeah. But
there's a long way from here to there.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to talk about that offline.
Yeah.
Of course, all of this is complicated because we have volunteer teams. In the private sector, when I'm running a team of peers or I'm working with a team of peers, it's really easy to deal with somebody who isn't actually on board because I fired them. Or I shift them over to a project manager I don't like. It's harder to fire volunteers. You probably don't want to be doing that. So we have to understand a couple things about running a volunteer team. The first is, and this happens a lot in volunteer organizations, you know that people say, yeah, I'll do that. And then the next meeting is, did you do that? No. Did you think to call any of us and tell us you weren't? No. Okay. The only optional part of volunteering is the initial commitment. It's the actual saying, yeah, I'll do it. Once you've said, yeah, I'll do it, it's like any other commitment. You got to do it. And if you're not going to do it, things happen. You got to let us know you're not doing it as early as you can so that we can cover for you. Don't wait till the next meeting and say, oh yeah, that. Sorry. Yeah, that room we're supposed to be in tomorrow night, didn't book it. And I hate this excuse. I get it all the time. Yeah, but what do you want? I'm just a volunteer. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Does it irritate you?
Yes.
I used to be a Rotarian. And if you don't know Rotary International, it's one of the most successful volunteer organizations on the planet. And it is not in their culture to miss commitments and then excuse it just because they're volunteers. It just isn't in their culture. It is a cultural issue, this thing where volunteers think that they can just not make their commitments. So I encourage you, again, this is a relatively young organization, I encourage you to build an organization where a commitment by a volunteer is considered still to be a carved in stone commitment.
Yeah.
And that you can build your culture on that. The expectation that a volunteer will do what they say they're going to do, and if for a reason they can't, they'll let you know as quickly as possible. And then finally, many hands make light work. I didn't know that was a Heya proverb until I Googled it. I'm not entirely sure I know who the Heya are. But that's an old saying. It goes without saying. And you know, the best way to be able to enable volunteers to meet their commitments is have enough people and have enough volunteers that you can divide the tasks into small chunks. Right? Volunteers don't say yes to something and then don't do it because they're not nice people. In fact, they're doing it because they are nice people. They're sitting at the meeting going, oh, that really needs to get done. Okay. I mean, I have no time to do this, and my life sucks, and I got a major project due at work. Okay, I'll do it. Right? They want to help. They want to say yes. and then they get overburdened, and what's going to slip isn't their family, it isn't work, it's volunteer. So the more volunteers we have, and the smaller we can divide these chunks up, the easier it is for volunteers to make their commitments, and the less obligated a volunteer feels to go, oh, okay, right? Because it's not as big work, it's not as big a chunk of work to do. So what does our team model look like, our team of peers look like? Well, the first is external management. I'm going to go into detail on all of these. Internal management, organization, volunteers, fundraising, voter contact, and communications. These 7 roles map directly to the 7 goals. Notice it is not a hierarchical chart. It's a circle. In the center is communication. Teams of peers work best when they rely heavily on communication. And there's no barrier to communication here, right? You don't see any dotted lines on here saying that everybody has to talk to external management before they can talk to anybody else. If communications wants to talk to voter contact, they do. There's no artificial constraints in how you communicate. Probably a good idea to always loop in internal management. We'll talk about why in a second. Because, it's kind of their job to know what's going on. But you don't have to talk to them first or get permission to talk to anybody else. So let's drill into these a little bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I actually don't have a clock here. Somebody tell me when I run out of time. So external management is responsible, this is the goal of ensuring there's an effective organization around you. The external management's job is to make sure that sensible BC, from your local perspective, is firing on all cylinders and is operating as effectively as possible. In a political organization, this would be the president. Their job is to manage up or out. Their job is to make sure that they're connecting with all of the other sensible BC or local organizations in your area and connecting with them, or outside your area, to make sure that they're holding Nick to account for what Nick says he's going to do. Or Dana. That somebody's picking up the phone and going, hey, this really isn't operating as well as we'd like it to. This is some of our ideas. Their job is to act as the central Sensible BC's organization's advocate to your team, and your team advocate to the central organization. Right, so their job is to sit in the central meetings on the phone or whatever is going on, and listen to all the ideas. We're going to do this, 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 isn't it great? And take all that in, and then put up their hand and say, okay, yeah, we've got 3 volunteers in my area, so which one of those things do you want us to do badly? Right, their job is to set the expectations so that the team isn't feeling unduly burdened. Their job at those meetings is to protect their team. Then when they come home, and they're sitting around your team meeting, it's like, okay, they want us to do this, and they want us to do this, and they want us to do this, and this, how are we going to do it? And their job is to ensure that your local team is aligning with the purpose and organization of the central team. And then you're not doing things which are going to run contrary to that central messaging, and then you're on point. In politics, this happens every now and again. I have seen writings, in the liberal world campaign for the NDP guy, and vice versa. They probably thought they had really good reason, but it's not necessarily, what the central organization would have liked to see happen. You don't want somebody in one of your local organizations going out there and giving messaging which is contrary to the central messaging. That will cause you problems. So that's this person's job, is to manage that. The other thing external management is really good for is community liaison, right? You want somebody on this external management committee who is able to pick up the phone and call a local Chamber of Commerce president, or the Rotary president, or the BIA president, and have a conversation where they'll take the call. Because you're going to need to build community contacts and build community relations. And so you want somebody who's well known in the community. like that. Yes, I'm a geek. Yes.
Earlier you mentioned that there is a big legal part into campaign management. Would you say that internal management would take care of that legal side as well?
Yeah, the internal management committee would normally have your compliance officer on it. And if you only have a one-person internal management committee, then it's a good idea for them to have some understanding of the act and the rules, CRTC regulations, and all of the different legislation which impacts the campaign. And again, I'm assuming that Nick and the central organization will have the information available to you on that, but you still want somebody locally where you can pick up the phone and saying, okay, we're at a house, and they're saying we couldn't legally knock on their door. Is that true? Right? You want to be able to answer those questions quickly. For instance, and I don't know the answer to this, I don't know if a third-party organization is able to gain entrance to a secure building during the election cycle. I don't think you are. Right, so that's something important to know. Are you sending your volunteers out? Are they committing trespass?
Same as the elections in BC. Is your campaign?
You can't knock on secure buildings?
You can.
You can? So as a third-party validator in a federal, I'm not sure that you can. And in the election, like an actual campaign can. But this is the thing, you need somebody who actually understands the Elections Act, so you're not putting your volunteers at risk. And who has a lawyer on speed dial. Money is important. I'm not going to go into a lot of details. I did check out, I'm going to talk to Nick and Anita about this, but I did check out the Sensible BC website last night as I was developing this slide. And there's no monthly giving option.
Yes, there is.
There is? Yeah. On the donate page, or am I in the wrong, was I in the wrong place?
On the main donations page, there's a click through link here at the top.
Okay, I missed it. Probably want to make it a little more obvious. Monthly giving is awesome. It trumps single donations for a number of reasons. First, it gives you budget certainty. If you know you are getting X amount of money each month for monthly donations, it makes it a lot easier to plan. That's way better than doing 3 big fundraising drives where you have no idea how much money you're going to get from them each month or each year. Because what happens is one false flag. If you have monthly donations, you know exactly how much money you have each month, and you can budget to that. And then your one-time donations or bonuses, you can bank those for the actual campaign. So monthly giving, always encourage monthly giving. If somebody says, okay, I'm going to write you a $100 check, and you say, how about 12 $100 checks? No, this goes better if you laugh at my jokes. I'm not sure on the legislation, but I'm pretty sure you're allowed to do pass the hat and anonymous donations. Every single time 3 or more people come together in the name of Sensible BC, pass the hat. Even if somebody's only putting a couple dollars in, that is a couple dollars more than you had before. Anonymous donations are a tremendously effective way of raising money. You have a rally, pass the hat, everybody drops in $5, that's, a lot of money at the end of the day. Everybody drops in $20, that's even more. The most important part of passing the hat is actually asking. Okay? So, I'm full of political stories, so you have to forgive me, I'm going to another one.
Go ahead.
When the Liberal Party had its leadership debate here in Vancouver, I was president of the party in BC. And the great thing about the federal party doing an event in your province is that you have no responsibilities whatsoever. Except to be, I was going to be on stage, and I took my wife on a date to the debate. I'm still married, surprisingly. So I was getting there, and I had no response. I was so looking forward to it. I was going to say, this is going to be great. And I get there, and 3 of our volunteers, bless their hearts, are sitting there with the big donation buckets, back to back to back in a triangle, big frowns on their face looking into the buckets. Yeah. And nobody's putting money in the buckets for some bizarre, strange reason. Yeah. So I apologized to my wife, had a volunteer take her to her seat, grab the buckets and say, guys, you're doing it wrong. And I would walk up to people. Hi, my name is Brian. I'm president of the association here in British Columbia. Put 20 ducks in the bucket. Yes. If I knew them. Yeah. If I didn't know them, it's hi. The Conservatives are going to attack us. We need money to defend ourselves. Can you spare $20? You don't have any cash? There's a bank machine right there. I'll go with you. I raised about $1,400 in 35 minutes.
Yeah.
Just by asking.
Yep.
Let other people control their no. They don't want to put money in the bucket? They won't put money in the bucket. Never feel bad for asking for money. And if you don't do it aggressively, I learned how to fundraise from the Honorable Dr. Hetty Fry. And you can say a lot of the things about Hetty, but she's not shy. And I was at a fundraising session, and she was presenting, and I didn't learn very much about it because it was all technical. But at the end, she stands up and pulls up the hat, and she goes, and there was one exit from the room. And as she's walking to the one exit in the room, she goes, everybody's going to put money in this hat or I'm going to step on you, and I'm wearing 6-inch stilettos. And if you know Hetty Fry, she wasn't joking. So you either left that room with $20 less in your pocket or bruised. You got to ask. And it's not enough just to stand up at the front of the event and go, hey, you know, the hat's at the back, have fun. No, you got to take the hat, you got to do that too. But you got to take the hat and put it in front of people's faces. It is the most effective form of fundraising. It really is. It's the easiest. You want to raise a lot of money? Do a free fundraiser. Get people in the room. Have the conversation. Let your special guest make the pitch. And then ask them.
But you want to point out that people ought to feel good about their donation. So the Hetty Fry reference seems like you might not enjoy giving money to that.
That was an internal crowd, and everybody was, it was taken.
That's just an example.
It's an example. I mean, I wouldn't suggest stepping on people.
Hetty's personality and her sense of humor, and she's playing to a crowd that she knows.
Exactly.
It was not the same as if I were to say, everybody here, before you go out, you get about $20 or I'm going to stomp on your foot. I don't think it would work.
No, I don't think it would work quite either.
We wouldn't feel it anyways.
But I mean, the point is that you need to be aggressive in the ask, not necessarily impolite.
Right.
Now listen, one of the new trends in fundraising is instead of doing this $100 a plate dinner, you know, with bad spaghetti and horrible wine, put on a low-cost event, $10 or $20 to get in the room, and then ask people for donations once they're in, or do a free event. Actually, the event where I've raised the most money in the last 2 years was a completely free event, and we raised $18,000. It being a help that we had Bob Ray in the room.
Can you give us an example of something?
Yeah, we basically what we did is for that it was a free wine and cheese at Dr. Fry's house, and Bob Ray was there, so he was leader of the party, and it was free. But we made sure on all of the invitations everybody knew this is a fundraiser. And when they walked in the room, Bob gave the speech on why they should donate. Somebody got up and gave a speech on how they donate, which was very short. It was the volunteers. There were a bunch of volunteers in the room. And then we've had a couple of people perhaps seated in the room who, as soon as you said, okay, so take out your checkbook, somebody went up, okay, I'm donating. And somebody else put up, I'm donating. And then that creates a social pressure. And suddenly everybody's like, as the volunteers are coming up, are you going to donate? And this was specifically to try to get monthly donations. And so we got, it was $18,000 pledged. Just by having 100 people in a place with some wine and cheese. It was very low cost, very cheap. And we relied, instead of trying to get, you know, our 22-year-old volunteer on the phone going, do you want to buy a $120 ticket? We let somebody with personality who they respected make that pitch instead. So get them in the room. Once you have them in the room, there's lots of ways to pick their pockets.
You make us sound friendlier and friendlier. It started off with you should donate to we'll stomp your feet to having plans.
Well, no, and I mean, and I'm of course joking, right? I mean, obviously if I'm making the pitch, but it is, the point is far too often in our society, far too often in our culture, it's a bad thing to ask for money. And the reality is the good work we're doing here requires money. In fact, I'm pretty sure I read that on the website. So, so the key is don't be embarrassed about asking for money. Of course you do it politely. There are ways to actually construct it to get more money.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about those ways, you can sound awfully cynical.
Yeah.
So I come off as cynical sometimes.
Well, like you said, maybe it's just the way our society proceeds, even asking for money, because rich people don't like it. They control a lot of media.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's hard sometimes to look at somebody you know who's struggling financially and ask them for money. But you'd be surprised, a lot of people will still give you $5 because they believe in your cause. So what you need to do is create a space where they feel good about giving them. And if you have, somebody like Dan or Mark standing at the front of the room talking about why the money is so important, then you've created a space for them to feel good about giving you the money. Final bit about fundraising. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Send thank you cards. I had a friend who was running for city council in Saskatoon. He defeated a 3-term incumbent. One of the ways he did it is after every time he had an interaction with the voter at the door and they said, didn't matter what they said, he actually went home that night, hand wrote a note to them on a card, brought out some detail from the voter interaction, and then they went around and dropped it in their mailboxes. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Thank yous go a really long way. And fundraising, your next best dollar is your last best dollar. The way to ensure that somebody who donated once is going to donate again is thank them, and thank them, and thank them again. Most successful fundraising emails I've ever sent started with thank you. Obviously, sincerity is important in that. Be sincerely thankful.
Isn't it probably taking time out to talk to your donor, to have a conversation with them?
Yes.
It brings them more money, because I know with the coalition, that's what I did. I raised $10,000 in 2 hours, just talking to a donor about who we are and what we are.
Yep. And giving them space to feel important. Like, calling up, again, you're talking about free fundraisers. Also do free thank you events.
Exactly.
Right? If you're going to have a personality coming in to have a conversation with people in your community, do a private donor event first. No cost or low cost.
And
then have, pass the hat.
Yes.
But give them a few minutes, make them feel important. Because they are important. They're the ones funding your organization. Organization is responsible for handling logistics. They're responsible for making sure that you have rooms, that you've got audio, video, whatever you need. The other thing the organization is responsible for is actually having deep connections with the community. If you want to have a 100-person event, it's the organization chair's job to know which facilities are available that let you hold 100-person events, and to know the person on that board who you can call and get to your room for free. Right? And in order to create those connections, they've got to know amongst your volunteer group who serves on what boards. What other volunteer organizations are they members of? Who are the Rotarians? Who are the Lions? Who are the Elks? Who are the Masons?
The Rotarians.
Who serves on the community center board? Who serves on the library board? Who can you pick up and call on city council? Right? So it's not necessarily the organization chair job to have all of those relationships, but their job is to know what within their network connects to these other networks. Because it's surprisingly easy to get free space if you know the right people. It's surprisingly easy to get a sound system donated if you know the right people. Right? If you know that the manager of the local Long and McQuaid's has, really, really wants to see marijuana legalized, being able to pick up the phone and make a phone call goes a long way. So you need to know what those connections are. So organization chair is responsible for understanding what connections the volunteers have. So communications, I'm not supposed to talk about communications for very long. So I'm going to. I'm going to start it like this. Everybody in this room is weird. Sorry, I'm counting myself in. I know, the first thing is, you're here on a Saturday, you've paid money on a Saturday to listen to me talk. That's not normal behavior. But second of all, you're engaged in political activism. Less than 5% of Canadians are engaged in political activism. Less than 2% are members of a political party. So the very fact that you're out there passionately working for an issue you care about means that you are not normal. Be proud of not being normal.
Yay.
But here's the thing. When you go out and you're having a conversation with somebody, they're probably not weird in the way you are. And if you're going to go get really deeply passionate and start talking about the ins and outs of legalization and start talking about legislation, in politics we do this all the time. We walk up to somebody and it's like, let me tell you why our healthcare policy is better than, and you start talking about national program this and blah, blah, blah. They don't care. Or more accurately, it's not that they don't care. It just doesn't relate to their life and the way you're communicating.
Yeah.
All right, when I walk up to a voter and I get up in the morning and this happens depressingly often, and I'm showering and I make prorogation this and time allocation this, and Stephen Harper sucks.
Yeah.
And I walk out my front door and I see my neighbor mowing their lawn, and I walk over to Stephen. They don't care. Right? We have a national program for this, and they don't care. What they care about is they just have to put their mother in managed care because they couldn't get the time off of work to look after her. And that isn't related to a national policy initiative in their minds. That's related to, that sucks, I had to do that.
Yeah.
They care about the fact that their 28-year-old adult son has just moved back into their house and is drinking all their milk because they can't get a job.
Yeah.
They don't care about a national jobs program. They want somebody to get them a job. Right? It is disconnected. But that's the point, is they don't see the connection. So you got to draw, you got to paint the picture for them. And if you start at the end, all you're going to do is turn them off. The way people vote, it's about 85% of the population votes based on emotion, not based on reason. How many people here have worked on an election campaign? Did any of you work on a campaign, like in a campaign office? How many voters came in and asked to see the platform? Did you read the platform? Yeah, here did I. And I was running the campaign. Right? People don't vote based on, oh, they're fully costed this and fully costed this. They vote because that nice young person from Sensible BC knocked on my door. I don't really remember what we talked about, but I liked her. Tick. They vote based on a perceived emotional connection. So our job is to create an emotional connection.
How do you find that emotional connection or that hot button to start the conversation in the first place?
Well, I mean, you're going to be walking off with a particular policy. But honestly, at the door, it's, so the most successful candidate in terms of door-to-door canvassing I know is a gentleman who no longer is in federal politics from Scarborough named Jimmy Carey Janus. And again, leaving aside anything you may think about Jimmy K. The reason why he was in the house for 24 years, 26 years. And the reason was because every year he went and knocked on every single door in his constituency. And when the door opened, he didn't say, hey, I'm here to talk about healthcare or whatever. He said, John, I haven't seen you since last time. How's it going? Did your kids get into school? How's your dog doing? I heard your wife had a surgery. How's she doing? People voted for him because they felt they had a personal connection with him and that he was their friend, not because he brought any specific policy initiative to their door. And that's how people vote. So now, we're a third-party validator, and we're not actually bringing a candidate to them. But it's the same principle. What they're going to connect to is the emotions of the issue, right? Your personal story. Obama did a lot of this in the States, where personal narrative-driven canvassing, where somebody would knock on the door and say, hi, I want to share with you why I'm voting for president. You know? And so what you don't want to get into the specifics of the issue, you want to create an emotional framework for them to understand the issue. So if I were canvassing for this, I would be saying, hey, listen, I have diabetic neuropathy. Marijuana is one of the only things that actually solve my pain issues. Right? Right there, I'm now not talking about some abstract policy. I'm talking about something that's personal.
When you see somebody at the door with a walker, that really connects.
Yeah. Yep. So it's about tying the issue to your personal. But what it's actually about overall is creating a relationship. Right? It's giving that voter the space to connect with you in a meaningful way. And so when I'm canvassing politically, and I won't go through my full 90-second spiel, but my canvass starts with, when I was 16, my mother was killed by a drunk driver. You know, I don't care how conservative you are, nobody slams the door in my face when I start off my canvass that way. And because I make an emotional connection, then I go on to explain why Harper's an idiot. But then, sorry, are there any am I offending anyone with conservative jokes? Because, so it's about creating that emotional connection. And that's what they're going to remember.
Well, you've got me flummoxed as to how that personal connection can relate to possibly what you're at the door for. So give me your spiel for 90 seconds that links those two.
Well, I won't give the full 90-second spiel, but basically it goes into vote forgiveness and how I, as a victim or as a family member of a victim, wanted revenge, and how after I moved through the grieving process, I no longer wanted revenge. So the Harper government and our entire crime legislation framework is about taking advantage of the emotional state of victims and their desire for revenge and punishment, as opposed to what's best for society. They care more about getting votes off of crime issues than they do about actually addressing the societal issues of crime. And how, when I came to realize that, I decided I want to work for a party that's more focused on keeping people out of jail, about through rehabilitation, addressing the root causes of mental illness, addiction, poverty, to keep people out of jail, and when we have to put people in jail, rehabilitating them back into society. So it's about linking my emotional state and how vulnerable I was to a specific set of messaging within one period of my life, and then realizing that when the cameras are off and nobody cared what I thought anymore, that isn't the right approach. And that the conservatives are just issued and getting votes off of that stuff.
Sounded good.
It's actually, you know, it actually is effective at the door when I'm talking about, you know, multi-billion-dollar prison complexes and stuff to house unreported crime.
Yes.
Yeah. But the key is it's an emotional connection, right? And what's great about it is, as soon as I've opened up and been sincere and connected emotionally with somebody, then he's like, "So what's your story?" And then they tell you their story.
Yeah. And
now you've got a bond. And that's why people vote. So if you say, "Listen, you know, thanks a lot for sharing your story. This is the kind of thing that we need to do, and we need to legalize for these reasons," they're going to remember that when they start considering their position. So communications is all about creating relationships. It's about creating an emotional connection. So if you're running social media or your website or Facebook or making calls to reporters, the key here is you build a relationship. Don't treat your social media platform as a bully pulpit where you just sit there and send out announcements. Interact with people. When somebody responds to your tweet, respond back to them. Right? Set up a filter in your community. You can filter pretty easily based on geography and Twitter. Set up a filter. See anybody talks about marijuana within that filter, respond to them. "Hey, I'm with the local Sensible BC. How are you doing? I'd love to hear more about your issue with this." Never argue. Don't feed the trolls. Yeah. Now I say that, don't read my Twitter account. Yes,
Are you saying the main thing to this is be a better listener in the long run than a talker? We have 2 ears, 1 mouth.
Yes, sir. Actually, it's sales 101, actually. The majority of human beings believe that an interaction goes well when they do most of the talking. So if you're walking up walk up to the door and you do all the talking, of course you think it went well. The voter probably didn't. Right? So listen. It's exactly what you want to do. And you want to create a safe space for them to be honest in what they're telling you. I know that my friend Andrew is talking about canvassing and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure he's going to cover it in his workshop. But that's the key. Do more listening and talking. There's also a volunteer session, so I'm not going to go into this a lot, but you need people who are managing and working with volunteers. Volunteer management is the hardest thing to do on a campaign. You've heard the term herding cats?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's easy compared to volunteer coordination. And part of that is in no small part because campaigns need canvassers more than we need anything else. All of the data shows that the most effective form of voter contact is in person, at the door, face to face, eye to eye, handshake to handshake voter contact. Like far and away. Up to 3 to 4 times more effective than any other form of voter contact. What's the least favorite thing for a volunteer to do on a campaign? Canvass.
Yep.
There's a lot of reasons for that, and there's ways to improve it through training, practice, and how you structure your canvas. But volunteer management, you're basically asking people to do things that they're very uncomfortable with doing. Either knocking on doors, standing at an event table, or making phone calls. Excuse me. So you need a group of people in your volunteer coordination team that are very good at recruiting people, and training them, and getting them out onto the doors. And then finally, voter contact. And again, Andrew is running voter contact sessions, but I will say this, the anonymous voter contact is useless voter contact, okay? There's no point in doing a big presentation in front of a room like this where you have a guest speaker and you do all this stuff if you don't know who's in the room. There's no point in marching in a parade if you don't have some way of collecting the name, phone number, and postal code of the people that are watching the parade who agree with you. Because if you don't collect that information and turn it in the nation builder, who are you going to call on eDay? How are you going to get out the vote on the people who agree with you if you don't actually collect the information of the people that who agree with you? Study after study after study, if you haven't read them, Get Out the Vote by, I can't remember the guy's name, is an excellent book that goes through scientific research on the most effective forms of actual voter contact. The Victory Lab by Sasha Eisenberg. All of the books, all of the studies in the last 10 years show that the most effective way to get your point across and to win elections is to go up and have a conversation with a voter in person.
What was it?
The Victory Lab by Sasha Eisenberg. And the other book is Get Out the Vote, and it's 2 researchers whose name I always forget. Green something. Anyway, it's not hard to find. A distant second, and it is a very distant second to in-person voter contact, is telephone calls. Robocalls, robo-surveys, direct mail have almost no impact. Signs have a 0% impact on voter intention. None. Absolutely zero zada.
Yeah.
All of the time, energy, and money that political campaigns spend on signs is wasted money.
Why do they do it?
Because they think they have to.
Public show that makes it look like they're up there.
That's part of it. Part of it's tradition. If you don't do signs, somebody's going to write a process piece saying you didn't do signs, you don't have a real campaign. Signs do have value with people who are committed to your cause, because it's private property signs. Because what it does is allow them to be proud of you. Right? So there's a vote reinforcing aspect to signs where somebody says, I'm voting for this person, and I'm proud of it. That actually, if you look at the study data, and I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but it does actually increase the chances they are going to vote by X% if they put a sign in the yard. And then it goes up even more. If they give you $5, the chances that they're going to vote for you go up even more than that. But in terms of actually persuading, like all of the time, energy, and money put into private or public property signs has almost no impact on voter intention. That changes a little bit in municipal elections where you've got, 5,000 people running for mayor, and name recognition becomes an issue. But in provincial and federal elections, it has almost no impact. I haven't seen much data out of the States on ballot initiatives and signs, but again, other than making people aware that there's a ballot initiative there, and that would be the most akin to what we're going to be trying to do, right? I would imagine again, it has no impact on intention because the sign it doesn't communicate, it doesn't create that emotional connection. And that's what influences vote, it's an emotional connection. There was a by-election a couple of years ago that spent $35,000 on signs. 2/3 of them never left the campaign office. For $20,000 on an election campaign, you pay 10 canvassers to knock on close to 40,000 doors over the course of the 36 days. Would have been a better use of their money. They lost by 1,200 votes.
Did they canvass also?
Nope, well, eventually.
Who was advising them?
Not me. I had a very long argument with the campaign manager on that one.
Are we allowed with election acts to pay canvassers?
Yeah.
We are.
Oh yeah.
And what kind of wage do you offer?
I've seen, well, I've done, depending on what it is, I've done everything from minimum wage to $13 an hour. I know the NDP have paid as high as $16 to $18 an hour for canvassing.
In a competitive riding, that might be worthwhile.
In any riding, it's worthwhile. There's no better use for $10,000 or $20,000 on a campaign than paying canvassers. And the reason I say that is because it offers you consistency. What you're paying for is the people showing up every single night. Right? Volunteers are great. I love volunteer canvassers. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to replace the volunteer canvass. But as a volunteer, you canvass what, 3 times during a campaign, 4 times during a campaign? If you're a real geek, maybe 10 times. How do you build a consistent night-by-night canvass? How do you actually ensure that your persuasion targets are actually canvassed? If you don't have people that you can say, be here every night. Plus the other thing is the more you canvass, the better you get at canvassing. So it's when I'm paying people, we offer them better training. Plus they're out there, we do nightly reviews. We reevaluate their work every night, and we offer them feedback. After a week or 2 into the campaign, they're now expert canvassers. Yeah.
What is the best time of the day to canvass?
It depends on the neighborhood. It depends on the breakdown of the neighborhood. If you are canvassing a neighborhood that has a high number of seniors, early afternoon, high numbers of seniors or stay-at-home moms, early afternoon. If you're canvassing dual-income families, or if you're targeting the working member of the household, then 5:30 to 8:30.
So there's no sanctimony about the dinner hour campaign. Well, these campaigns that they're ready to wait until after dinner, but that's probably irrelevant now.
I think you find that in today's world that there is no such thing as a dinner hour for most families. I mean, my family eats at about 7:30 if we're lucky. Especially if you have dual-income families, they get as commuting dual-income families in particular, right? When do they get home? They eat. So you just have to be prepared to say, I'm sorry we bothered you at dinner. By the way, have you seen our list?
And 8:30 is kind of, you can cut off, that's unreasonable.
I think legally you can go to 9 or 9:30, I can't remember which one.
There are laws about it?
Yes. That's what I'm saying, you have to have a compliance person who understands the legislation in your area around canvassing.
Federal or provincial?
I believe that's federal, though some communities have bylaws.
Like no soliciting after nothing?
Well, yeah, one of the things to understand, well, I mean, I'm not actually sure where, again, this is where I don't understand the Elections Act necessarily from a third-party perspective on this. A political campaign is specifically under legislation not a solicitation. So if they say it says no solicitation on the door, you can ignore that. Because as a political campaigner, you're not soliciting. I don't know if that holds true for third-party issues. Sorry?
I know soliciting warning, she wants to know, do you abide by that? Or you go, disturb them from what they believe?
So, there's no easy answer to that question. I will say this, I always advise my volunteers never to knock on a door that says no solicitation. If I have paid canvassers, that depends on how much they tick me off.
fell under elections BC criteria,
Okay.
provincial jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction, and if we do a campaign outside of an election call that isn't involved with elections BC, it's bylaw enforcement. So you've got to be sure of this.
I'll just add a comment to that. If we do another referendum campaign, we can't pay people to canvass during that period. But before we do that, if we want to identify supporters, we can pay canvassers to go and knock on doors and say, would you sign this? And then we'll send someone back to your house who's a volunteer when we do the actual period. We'd probably spend 6 months in advance trying to identify our supporters, and that's when the paid canvassers would come in. And then we have these volunteers during that 90-day period. Just want to put that in.
Yeah, so, sorry, I haven't read the recall.
Yeah, there is groups of paid canvassers in this kind of campaign, even though you have to use volunteers for that 90-day period.
Great. I'm quickly running out of time. I know I'm about halfway through my presentation. So as I said, the 7 goals, the 7 roles directly map to the 7 goals that you need to be successful in order to win. And this is what creates our team of peers. How much time do I have?
5 minutes.
There's no real consensus.
Okay, I'm just going to go right to here. So you should have received, if you signed up for this, you should have received an email with my slide deck last night. If you haven't, then we'll make sure everybody gets it out there. Part of the reason why I actually kept more slides in here than I could physically address is so that you would have that in your package. Amita, Nick, and I are talking about ways that we can get further training to you guys after this. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of different things. The first is the process model we're going to use is a 4-stage process. All right, and we're going to cycle it around elections. I know you're going to be focusing on all 3 levels of elections. So what you want to do is when you're building out your process and you're defining your term, it's, you know, whatever the next, so you're focusing on municipal now, then probably federal will be the next one, then probably a provincial, and then back into a municipal. Of course, if we go into minority government, you could be focusing on federal after federal after federal after federal after federal. Every 6 months for the next 30 years. So the first thing we're doing is doing envisioning. This is where actually we're setting our goals and we're coming together as a team. Have anybody ever done team training? Have you heard the storming, norming, forming, performing? No. Forming, storming, performing, performing. So first you come together as a team, you get everybody in the room. Then you argue a lot, right? You start working it out, you get to know each other, you have all your different opinions. And out of those discussions and those arguments come a set of team norms. You come up with how the team is going to operate. Then and only then can you actually get to work. That's what the envisioning phase is for. So bring everybody who's going to be working together, all your volunteers, get everybody in the room, and get to know each other. Work it out. Figure out how you're going to work together as a team. And then set your goals, what it is we're going to accomplish. That's your success criteria. Then you move into planning. How are we going to meet those goals? Now, this is divided into 4 because it makes a prettier diagram. In reality, you want to spend as little time as possible in envisioning and planning and move into campaigning. And you want to spend all your time campaigning. Then when you reach campaign scope complete, depending on what type of campaign you're running, that's usually the night before E-Day. Then you move into getting out the vote. Yes?
Also getting out the vote, is it legal for us with this to arrange a situation where we actually take you to the poll? Like if we have a big van, that we could do something like that? Because a lot of people don't have the ability or the motivation to actually get transported to the vote.
That is certainly legal for a political campaign, like an actual candidate-based campaign. You would have to check the Elections Canada rules or whichever relevant elections body in terms of whether or not a third-party organization can do that.
By the way, how effective did you ever find that was, that driving people to vote?
It is not all that effective. I mean, you got to offer the service for your elderly and disabled voters, but that's more of a public relations exercise. Sorry, this is the cynical part of me coming out again. As more of a public relations exercise, the reality is municipally, I can say, in Vancouver especially, that the cab drivers take their signs off and do drive people to the polls, and that is very effective. But municipal campaign regulations around in-kind donations and whatnot are much more lax than provincial or federal.
I always found that driving people to the polls was a volunteer task that I assigned to people who did not really weren't good at anything else.
Yeah.
So.
There is things. Yeah, that and stuffing envelopes. Cleaning the campaign office. Federally, you're allowed to vote at the elections office 3 or 4 days after the writ drops and 2 or 3 days before the 4E day. So, depending on the quality of your data, if you have a good idea about what the persuadability of a voter is, so if there's somebody who sees every other long time they see to change their vote, as soon as they say at the door, yes, I'm voting for you, get them to the elections office and have them cast their ballot. So that can be effective, but that's only if you have good data. For the most part, it's a public relations exercise. So, in terms of actually structuring this campaigning phase, you don't want to actually just start and push through. You want to actually develop what we call micro-campaigns. And I don't have enough time to explain this. I am going to be going into this in more detail tomorrow. But basically what you do is you do a bunch of mini-campaigns. And instead of E-Day, you define an event as your E-Day. So instead of votes, what you're looking for is either money in the bank or bums and seats. And you use all of the same techniques that you would use to run an election campaign to get people in their seats or part them from their money. Right? And what are those steps? Well, the first step is activate existing donors and volunteers. Call people up and say, hey, we're having this big rally. Dana Larson's coming. It's going to be amazing. It's about 2 months from now. We really want to put on a great show. Can you spare $50? Right? You may only spend 20 of it on that event. They don't even know that. Donors like donating something which is immediate, where they're going to see a direct result from their actions. And you get the volunteers out. Hey, we're holding this big event. We're going to go knock on doors for it. You want to come help us out? Then you move into the ID to vote. You go to all the people who you think are going to be, who may vote for you. You start, or go come to the event. You knock on their doors, make phone calls, you send them lit. You say, hey, we're holding this big event. Do you want to come? By the way, remember, there's an election coming up, and we need you to vote the right way. And that's where you're collecting all of your data, right? You're interacting with them. You're inviting them to an event. But as you're talking to them, you're also feeling out, where are you on legalization? Do you agree with us on this issue? Because you don't want to wait until the 35-day writ period to do this work, right? On the 35-day writ period, what you want to be doing is going to all the people who said they do care about this and showing them which candidates to vote for. But you want to have all of that information beforehand. So well before the writ period, you want to be out knocking on those doors, asking people, we want to invite you to this event. By the way, what do you think about legalization? Here's some information. Go to our website. Go join. Is this being recorded? Right? Then you want to move into persuading the vote. Right? The people are going, well, I don't know. I don't know if I want to come to your event. No, come on over to the event. Listen, is it money? Is it because we're charging $10? No, we'll bring you in for free. You go to the people you think are going to be a harder sell. Right? Community groups who are nonpartisan. You go to city and mayor and council and say, hey, come on out to our event. Learn about this. You work on those, and then from persuade the vote, you move in to get out the vote. Right? So you go to people and say, hey, remember that event you said you were going to come to? It's tomorrow. Do you need a ride? So you run the exact same cycle that you would run during an election campaign, you run on the micro-campaign in order to make your event successful. And then event after event, you're building and building. Hopefully by the time then you get to the writ period next year, if you do 2 or 3 or 4 of these, you've got a groundswell of support that you can then tap into during the election campaign and drive towards success at the ballot box. All right. Let's see this. Okay. I'm going to leave it there because I'm out of time. But you have the whole package. Tomorrow, in the 2 sessions tomorrow, we're going to dive deep into campaign management, things like risk management, issue management, how you actually structure some of this stuff from a kind of campaign management PT perspective. So I hope that you all make the time to come to those, and thank you very much.
Thank you.